The object in my hand is small and seems completely harmless. It is less than 5 inches long, a little more than 2 inches wide, and about a quarter of an inch deep. The item is made of plastic and has a glass surface. Inside it is a set of microchips to perform its assigned functions. A seemingly innocent object, but in fact the greatest threat to privacy the world has ever known. We call them cell phones and voluntarily carry them around with us everywhere so that anyone who wants to can spy on us. George Orwell seems like a boring prophet when you look at the current reality. 20 years ago, they were a novelty. Now we see these little toys as a necessity. The world is changing even as we sleep. I know what you're thinking. There are rules and built-in protections. But just think about what kind of device is in my hand right now. It belongs to my wife, with whom I have lived for over 19 years. She has never been anything but loving and supportive. She is a dominant spouse, but not a stroppy one. For my part, I believed in the sanctity of marriage. A commitment made and not to be broken. I was certain that we would grow old together and that she would hold my hand on my deathbed. Years ago, I made a bargain. I traded my youth and freedom for her. I traded my life for her love and devotion. That commitment is stronger with me than any steel bars. I'm not some romantic idiot, I'm far from it. Marriage is something I take seriously. I didn't have love on my side, but rational judgment. Doris, my wife, is a romantic. Perhaps therein lies the problem of an ancient incompatibility that is finally making itself known. Here I am with my wife's iPhone at 2 in the morning in the small downstairs office we usually share. I grabbed the phone from the table by her bedside in our marital quarters. It was the only time it was available. She never parted with it. Like most modern women, she doesn't go anywhere without her phone. She spends more time on it than any other activity. It is within her reach 24 hours a day. It lies in her purse or bag when she's not holding it. It lies beside her bed when she sleeps. I had to wait until I was sure she was asleep to pick it up. Why take her phone, you ask? I wonder myself, am I going crazy? How can I be suspicious of my loving wife? What is wrong with me? I blame it on my profession. It has trained me to be suspicious. I only see the dark side, the evil that people do, not the good. To put it bluntly, I'm a lawyer. God willing. So I suspected her without good reason or justification. It was a small thing. I walked into the kitchen when my wife Doris, actually Dolores, but no one uses her full Christian name, was on the phone. On all previous occasions, she would have continued to ignore my presence, but this time she hung up immediately and seemed nervous. Later that evening, I asked to borrow her phone so I could call and order the pizza I'd talked her into eating for dinner. We don't have a home phone anymore, and we saved a bit when the girls went off to university as part of a save money any way we can strategy. She is usually against takeaways as she is very watchful of her weight, but today she gave in easily and handed over her phone without complaint. Why not, after all? She had cleared her call and text message logs. She, no doubt being a layperson, thought it was a good idea, but it wasn't. In fact, it screams deception. I suspect that clearing the log is an attempt to hide, so what is she hiding? That's exactly what I need to find out. I am fairly well informed and know that it is easier to tap a cell phone than a more traditional phone. Don't believe me? Go online, type in bug cell phone, and see what comes up. I even bought a little book on Amazon for 99 cents that explains all the basics. The big problem with the iPhone is jailbreak. What is that? Well, it's the need to change Apple's base operating code to allow the installation of non-Apple programs. My loving daughters broke the software lock on their mother's phone when she first got it. The girls were very proud of their ability to do this. Holding my wife's phone in one hand and the little cable that connects to the iPad in the other, I hesitate. Am I the right person now? Do I want to do this? Do I dare to do this? The reality is that it could end 19 years of marriage. A very good marriage. Why am I looking for a way out? We are a happy couple. I can't ask her for anything she wouldn't do for me. On the other hand, she rarely asks for anything in return. I entered our marriage reluctantly, but I've never regretted it. I suppose I should explain that. I'm David P. Landon Jr. I was at the frat party. Now forget everything you know about fraternities. The Brothers of Sigma Chi are a fraternity that is out of the mainstream. They were the biggest fraternity on a university campus because all it took to join was a good heart. That's right, the brothers had no respect for money or position. It was all about brotherhood and doing the right thing. The jocks mingled with the nerds, the academic stars with the guys who were constantly on probation. It wasn't uncommon to see a group drinking beer in the basement, while upstairs there were long tutoring sessions for those brothers who needed help. All races and religions mixed together, we were brothers. All it took to become one of us was to be a good person. Sounds simple, but it wasn't. When you failed to meet the standard, you let everyone down. The guilt is what's the hardest part, realizing that you failed your brothers. Being a Sigma meant carrying all the responsibilities associated with being a good brother. One of those responsibilities was the annual freshman party. The older brothers were chaperones. We invited all the freshmen, both men and women. The women invited the men so we could get an early look at potential brothers. More women came than men because, as everyone knew you were safe in the Sigma house, we were all gentlemen. I was a second-year law student and was usually well insulated from campus parties, but now it was my turn along with 9 other brothers to watch the pledges. It was responsible. If you're a Sigma, you can't shirk your responsibility. Doris came to the party with her girlfriends. I don't know what they were doing, but when they arrived, they were very happy. I recognized her, of course. It was the oldest daughter of my mother's best friend. I had seen Doris many times since then, but my recollection of her was tainted by earlier memories. In my imagination, she had remained a child. That was not the case now. She was a slender young woman, though still very young, but definitely more woman than girl. I had no choice but to walk over and say hello. Doris was 6 years younger than me, as were the friends she was with. I wanted to say hello and leave it at that. Doris greeted me enthusiastically and kissed me. She was always friendly and pleasant to be around, but it was obvious that she liked to show me off as an older student she happened to know. The fact that I was a member of the fraternity and one of the official hosts was a bonus for her. I ended up watching them all evening and drove them home after the party. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Doris set up a date with me for the following week. We hit it off and dated for the rest of the semester, nothing serious. She was a freshman and I was a graduate student, so it wasn't a serious relationship, at least not on my part. She broke up with him. She wanted to date other people. I was fine with it at the time, but quickly became depressed. I felt like I was missing her. I didn't know why, as she wasn't beautiful in the classic sense. She had such a young, fresh, and innocent look. She was very pretty, 5 feet 4 inches and maybe 110 pounds. There was nothing impressive about her looks, but one look into her soft brown eyes and I was hooked. It wasn't love on my part, more like a deep attraction. Doris had a wonderful, cheerful personality, and when she was gone, she left a big hole behind. I am intelligent, no, perceptive, but introverted and a bit shy. I tend to withdraw into myself. Doris is outgoing and, if given the chance, will make friends with everyone in the room. She's the first person invited to a party and the last person they want to see leave. But she broke up with me to go out with other guys. I accepted it. I was hurt and left with a battered ego, but that's what breaking up does to you. Fast forward to July after my second year of law school. I needed a summer internship. A summer job during your sophomore year is practically a necessity if you want to graduate with job prospects. I looked for jobs in New York, Chicago, Washington, D.C., and other major cities, but everyone else was looking. I eventually found a job in our sleepy little college town at an ancient law firm that specialized in eminent domain. I'll explain what that is a little later. The apartment I shared with 2 others was only rented through June. I needed to find a place to live for the summer. Luckily, the university had opened a dorm for summer school students, and they needed an assistant, a responsible older student who could act as a surrogate parent. The rent was free in exchange for me coming in as needed. I was fine with that, which meant the meager salary of a law clerk could be put to better use. Doris was in summer school and lived in the dormitory I supervised. I did my best to avoid her until one day I was walking up the stairs and she was a full flight ahead of me. When I reached my floor, Doris was coming down the other side. Quite odd, I thought, but she had come to block my way upstairs. "I want to talk," she said. "About what?" I asked, trying to get past her. "About us and what a stupid thing I did." As it turned out, she regretted the breakup and was completely remorseful. She asked for a second breakup. I wasn't sure, but I saw no reason not to start casual dating and keep my emotions in reserve. Doris didn't play a prank on me this time. Her birthday is the 15th of August. She turned 18 that summer, and when I asked her what she wanted for her birthday, she said, "I want you to make love to me. I'm a virgin, and I want you to be my first." I was amazed that we had already done everything but oral and intercourse, but I wasn't ready to go any further and told her so. She didn't take no for an answer, and as has become the rule over the many years we've been together, what Doris wants, she gets. The day after she turned 18 was a Saturday. Doris was volunteering at a women's shelter run by the local Now chapter. Early Saturday morning, Doris went to help out at the shelter. I had no idea what she was doing there, and the location of the shelter was kept secret. She didn't have a car, so I had to pick her up at the student union on campus around 4 in the afternoon. It wasn't far from the dorm we shared for a few more days. The new fall semester was going to start in 10 days, but we still had a few days left in our current dorm rooms. The union was a large coffee shop cafeteria in the center of campus. It wasn't crowded at 4 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, but it was never empty. When Doris showed up, she was dressed in jeans and a Now t-shirt, and she was holding an overnight bag. No doubt we were going to spend the night together, but why walk around with a bag if we lived in the same building at least temporarily? We walked into my dorm room. As an RA, I had no roommates. It was just us. I lit candles and drank a bottle of good White Star champagne. She was nervous as hell, and I was no better. I'm no Don Juan. I've had exactly 2 girlfriends, and I've never spent more than 2 nights with either of them. Doris put a lot of pressure on me. We had a few drinks, and then you know how it goes. In the end, Doris was just great. Doris decided it was time to tell her family, which consisted of Margaret and Lawrence Boswell, her parents, her younger sister Marianne, and her younger brother Larry Jr., about our relationship. It was quite a prosperous family. Larry Sr. was a senior vice president at the Chamont National Bank, and Margaret taught at Chamont Community College. It was an attractive and impressive family. They treated me like royalty. They were impressed by my status as a third-year law student. Moreover, her mother Margaret was originally from Chamont. She had attended high school with my mother at Sacred Heart Academy for girls. She became a teacher and my mother became a nurse. Margaret Boswell was a very attractive woman. She was taller than my Doris and not as voluptuously built, but there was a patrician grace about her. She possessed that statuesque beauty that ages well. Her husband was a tall, silver-haired businessman who looked fine in a suit, but was already a bit plump in middle age. He looked older than his 45 years, unlike his wife who didn't look 35 in her 40s. Marianne's youngest daughter, in her 16th year, was just beginning to get fat, but appeared to have already taken after her mother in height and appearance. Little Larry was only 11, but he was tall and showed promise that in time he would have a strong physique. He and I were to become great friends, and now he is my best friend. My folks had fallen in love with Doris long before we started dating, so she quickly became a de facto member of my family. Even my younger sister Paula was a Doris supporter. My brother was too young to have an opinion. My family was not as well off as Doris's family. My father, David Sr., ran the family equipment rental business with my Uncle John. My uncle is the older brother by 10 years and a bit of a tightwad. Under his strict management, things are going well, but it was my father's outgoing personality and his ability to make friends and work with all kinds of people, including those he hates, that really strengthened the business. My mom needed to work because the business makes a modest amount of money and my uncle is very conservative about profits. I am very close to my mother Agnes, a tall, pretty woman who at 41 was 8 years younger than my father. She, like me, towers over my father in height at 5 feet 4 inches. My mom's most spectacular attribute is her blonde hair. These days, it's not just the hairdresser who helps them. She is a registered nurse who regularly works nights. When I was a kid, she had a work schedule of 4 days a week. It wasn't the same days every week, they alternated. That's how it was while I was growing up. But over the years, she earned a master's degree in nursing and is now the head nurse at the hospital where she works. She has always needed to work and brings in as much or more income than my father. My relationship with my father is more complicated than with my mother. My father has always tried to get me and my shy, introverted personality to open up. He is a friendly, outgoing guy who seems to know everyone and believes in finding common ground with everyone. Dad believes in turning the other cheek and will never start a fight if it can be avoided. He and I see things differently most of the time, but he definitely approved of Doris. She's as smart and beautiful as her mother. When I was a kid, my favorite thing to do was to wait for my mom if she worked from 4 to midnight. Dad would let me stay overnight on Friday and Saturday nights, and then I would babysit my siblings while he went to pick Mom up from work. They would bring home hamburgers and shakes, and I would eat them with my parents. Sometimes my mom would come home alone really late, and she would kiss me goodnight as I lay in bed before she went to shower and get into her bed. When she leaned into me, I would catch the scent of her perfume, Chanel No. 5, which she wore when she got dressed. Sometimes I would wake up to hear the shower running and then the whispering of my parents, followed by my mother's distinctive laughter before their bed began to creak. It was a loving home. Even when things were slow, money was getting tight and my mom was taking more hours. My mom and Doris's mom were practically inseparable friends. Families generally mixed well and were looking forward to combining houses. My mom summed up the family's feelings about Doris. "That's a fine girl, Davy. Don't spoil her. We're all looking forward to the wedding." Mom, for all her love for me as the oldest child, sometimes saw me as a perpetually 12-year-old. For my part, I guess I can be pretty stubborn and immature at times. When it came to Doris, some of that may have been going on. I liked the whole girl thing, but I wanted her to remain just that, free and at ease. Doris had other thoughts on the matter. She moved in with me in September. I was trying to finish my third and final year of law school without too much trouble, but she insisted we move in together. This strained our finances as I tried not to be too much of a burden on my parents. Doris only took a hint from my mom, who increased her allowance. But that seemed to give reason to expect our relationship to get serious. By early May, things went beyond expectations and turned into, "What are you waiting for?" Doris made it clear that I had taken her virginity and that I owed her a debt of gratitude. Oddly, it was her idea not to make such a demand, but I could understand it from her point of view. I was going to graduate from law school. I would be 25, unmarried, and the proud owner of a ticket to a professional career. I was highly desirable prey for many single women living in the real world outside of university. She, on the other hand, had just finished her sophomore year, having accumulated enough credits to skip a semester, but was still over a year away from graduation. Moreover, she was an English literature major and needed a master's degree to teach high school. From her perspective, I was leaving her behind with all that she had done for me. This whole situation should have been a warning of sorts. Doris looked at things from the perspective of, "What's good for Doris is good for us?" As selfish as it seemed, she was right. We were good together. What she wanted almost always exceeded my goals. With her, I was somehow incomprehensibly complete as a person. So if she wanted a ring on my finger before I went out into the wide world, why did I hesitate? I didn't love Doris, so I said it. I was sure I liked her, and I was comfortable in our relationship. She brightened my days. But to marry her and be responsible for the rest of my life? I tried every excuse I could think of to leave Doris and avoid marriage. The main excuse was that she was too young, she was only 18, whereas I turned 25 in July. It was an excellent reason, though not an entirely genuine one, but my mother, of all people, rejected it. Doris is very mature for her age, and you are the exact opposite. Besides, I was studying to be a nurse, and I was only 17 when I married your father. It's not about age, it's about maturity. She has it, and your hesitancy after living together as a virtual husband and wife shows that you still don't have it. Mom wanted me to be a man, but I was hesitant, and in retrospect, it was prophetic. I don't know, she's 18. What will happen when she wakes up one day and decides she missed out on her youth by marrying too young? I said. I think we're talking about what you missed out on. You're going to get a professional degree and ride off into the sunset, leaving the poor girl behind, Mom said, seeing right through me. In the end, Doris had too much influence over me and too many allies for me to hold back, so I swallowed my doubts and tied the knot the week after the bar exam. There was no bachelor party, though. I heard there was a wild bachelorette party. I didn't have enough friends for a party, nor the necessary time. I was studying 20 hours a day to pass the New York bar, the toughest in the country. Only 41% of Harvard graduates passed the exam, and with the exception of Brooklyn and Albany, which are nothing more than 3-year bar courses, the average pass rate is 40%. By the time I found out I had passed the exam, Doris was 3 months pregnant. The pregnancy was theoretically an accident, but if you believe that, you're obviously not too smart. Doris was consolidating her position. We found out it was twins 3 days before the exam results came out. I was very worried about those results. By then, I already had a position as an attorney at the firm I had worked at the summer Doris and I had met, but I would only get it if I passed the exam. That meant a big pay raise, but money was still tight. I had to work 60 hours a week and bust my ass to make sure we had diapers by the time the kids were born. Doris never let our precarious financial situation or pregnancy affect her. She took her last exam as a junior just an hour before her water broke. 5 hours later, she gave birth to two girls weighing 6 pounds and 2 ounces each without a single moan. They were beautiful, perfect, and absolutely identical. For me, it was love at first sight. 18 years later, I still loved those girls, but not in the same way. Doris and I had a hard time at first. Money was tight, and we lived in a small apartment. She never complained or made me feel guilty that I couldn't provide for her better. Being a father was very hard. On one hand, it is scary, and on the other hand, your chest aches from the love you feel. I will never forget the joy of reading to my girls before bedtime. The Way of the Ducklings, The Cat in the Hat, Charlotte's Web, then Little House in the Big Woods, Anne of Greenwood, and finally the collected sketches of Washington Irving and Tales of the Alhambra. My two loves who seemed to adore me and believed I could do anything, solve any problem, fix any broken doll, and make the sun shine on every rainy day. It wasn't an easy life for me, but it brought great rewards in the form of hugs and kisses. But it wasn't all hearts and flowers. There were dark days, too. Doris and I went through all the crises together. I fell apart when the little ones got pneumonia and were hospitalized. Only Doris stayed strong and told me that God would not take the girls away from us. David, look at me. They will get better. Believe that, and that no matter what happens, I will always love and support you. In those early years, Doris was the rock on which our marriage was built. She was the pillar that sustained me. I could not have done it without her. I was eternally grateful to her, and I wanted to provide for her and our girls. I needed to succeed for them more than I needed to succeed for myself. I'm a rather lazy and unambitious man. Marrying Doris, her love, and our children changed everything. I was determined to succeed for my family, and I made some compromises to achieve that goal. The first few years were tough. My job required constant effort, but the rewards were meager. I had to compromise my principles and use my wits to rise above the pack of legal wolves stalking the same prey. On the home front, Doris and little Patricia and Elizabeth, Pat and Beth, made each victim worthwhile. Doris went to school in the evenings, and I stayed home doing office work and babysitting. I couldn't have been happier. Eventually, around the time they started kindergarten, she earned her Ph.D. Doris Boswell began teaching at a community college, but within 3 years she became a full professor of Shakespearean studies at the university. Her income was God-sent, but by then it was too late for me. I had already made partner in a not entirely honest way. My income was as high as my morals were low. But I had a family to take care of, and I was a lawyer, which meant I could rationalize selling my soul. I promised to discuss the topic of eminent domain, and now is the time. Most Americans have an unwavering belief in the sanctity of private property. They view home ownership as a purpose and a right. The idea that the government could come in and arbitrarily take their home away from them is unbelievable, and that is where the right to dispose of property comes in. When the government needs property for a public purpose, such as building a highway, bridge, school, or hospital, it goes through a process commonly referred to as forfeiture. This is simply the government taking the property it needs for a public purpose and paying the owner the value of the property taken. Simply put, in theory, it is unfortunate but necessary. We lawyers call this process eminent domain from the Latin. Supreme lordship, which is a fancy way of saying the government has the right to take your land. Theoretically, they should pay you the value of what it is worth, but if you are stupid enough to rely on the government to treat you fairly, then you deserve to have it taken away from you. This is where lawyers come to the rescue. Foreclosure is a complex system with a set of predetermined steps. A good, experienced lawyer is able to play these steps to maximize your money. No one has ever regretted hiring a good lawyer to represent them in the eminent domain process. The trouble is that most people don't have that representation, or they get an inexperienced attorney. So the key to success as a land litigation lawyer is getting your name and your position, namely a lot more money, out to potential clients. I owe my success to a lucky last name, because when I entered law school, Landon was right before Landrew. The alphabet placed me for 3 years next to James, call me Jimmy. Landrew, a young Republican, a member of the Republican State Committee, and when he graduated, he became a legal intern in the New York State Senate. He eventually became assistant counsel and then counsel to the Legislative Committee on Corporations and Associations. That was a big breakthrough for me. Jimmy and I were close, so who better to come to if he was in trouble than his friend? Now you're confused as to what Jimmy had to do with my success. Well, it was that Corporations Committee, which is important because it deals with all matters relating to real estate ownership. Why would that be useful? The answer is simple. No matter how foreclosures started, they have become a great way for the powerful to steal from the weak. The taking of property for public use is now only a small part of the government's taking of property. In most cases, the government is acting on behalf of some private interest. The terms used vary, but most often it is called some form of redevelopment. Don't believe me? Then next time you're in New York City, take a look at the New York Times headquarters. It's a beautiful stately skyscraper near Times Square. The land on which it stands was taken by eminent domain, one of the most expensive properties in the world, in a lucrative deal that allegedly saved the Times nearly $80 million. Needless to say, the newspaper did not point this out to its readers. My job is to seek justice as best I can. I use every trick I can think of. Outside appraisers who will say anything I ask, and appraisers from the state who sometimes work for me. I pay my appraisers well, thereby ensuring my clients are treated exceptionally fairly. The strategy is to get to the one about to get ripped off before anyone else, and that's where my friend Jimmy comes in. It starts innocently enough, with a vague warning to be on the lookout for a major property takings along the Hudson River that clears the way for a luxury development, but it soon becomes pay to play. Jimmy has a problem with horses as well as slot machines and Indian casinos. He often needs money. Not gifts, just loans that are never paid back. The partners in my firm were amazed at my ability to spot new potential businesses. My keen perception was well rewarded, and for years it stayed that way. Nothing fancy, just a little prior knowledge and a little work on my part to knock doors down to people who would have been much better off if I had been their lawyer. It was actually community service, but once you crossed the line, it was easy to jump over. More on that later, but now back to my wife's phone. I downloaded my vicious program into Doris's phone. It was supposed to record all of my wife's phone conversations and install them on my iPad. It would send all text messages she sent or received to my phone. But it also gave me the ability to listen in on her conversations. I could do this in real time or set the bug that her phone had become to record for up to 2 hours and send it to my iPad. In theory, there was nothing Doris could say or hear that I couldn't share. The practice turned out to be somewhat different. On the first day, my wife spent almost 5 hours on the phone. Going through all of her phone conversations would have been an insurmountable labor. She spent 45 minutes with a friend doing nothing but discussing a dress she saw at the mall but didn't buy. For 3 weeks, I trudged through this nonsense, and I thought I was getting pretty good at it. I became convinced that I was suffering from paranoia. I was just about ready to call it quits when the damn text came in. I was in a meeting with a new client when my phone made a distinctive ringing sound to notify me that I had a new message. I ignored it, but a few minutes later, another ringing sounded and then a third. I rarely send or receive texts, and Doris was the same way. A matter of age, I'd say. Texting is not part of my generation's DNA. Finished with the conference call with the client, I checked my phone. 3 new messages had been relayed from the spy program on Doris's phone. Remember, we're having lunch today. Mark. Can't miss you that much. When and where? URD. Cooper at 12:30 p.m. Love you. It took me a while to realize that Doris had a lunch date with someone named Mark, whom she missed and who said he loved her. Cooper's restaurant was a small, intimate establishment just north of the traffic circle, and therefore quite out of the way. Exactly the kind of place one chose for intimate dates. It was after 12. I didn't have a way to get there that fast, but I had a trump card up my sleeve I could eavesdrop. I set the bug on her phone to active, used my iPad to listen in, and nonchalantly got into the car. At first, only the noise of cars reached me. Doris was in her car. As she pulled up, I heard the faint sounds of a restaurant and a greeting from the hostess. "Good afternoon. What can I do for you?" said a pleasant female voice. "I'm meeting someone." "Oh, there he is." Then came the sound of them hugging, or maybe kissing. Doris sat down and they exchanged greetings. They talked a little about work. Apparently, they had worked together at the university. He spoke young, strong, and very confident. Soon he turned the conversation to her. Compliments were sprinkled about her hair, her dress, and her overall stunning beauty and youthfulness. I listened to being seduced. It would have been interesting if it hadn't been about my wife. When the food arrived, the conversation turned to me. How old and fat I am. How gray and boring. A cold fish that doesn't deserve a beautiful, vibrant young woman. And finally, his needs. How much he wants her and how happy they could be. But I can't. I'm married. I intend to grow old with David. Please understand. Can't you see he's already old? You're still young. Live while you can. If you can't leave him, then we'll be separated. No, I will not cheat. I have never been with anyone but my David. I love my husband. But I want you and need you to be complete. I need David to understand that. There has to be a way. Just give me time for everyone's sake. Please, I've waited so long already. I know, but I need time. Okay, but please no longer than that. As I pulled into Cooper's parking lot, the conversation turned to mundane things again. I took a spot far in the back of the parking lot, out of sight of what I recognized as my wife's car, but still able to see the door. At some point, they went back to talking about how they needed to be together, and that Doris would try to find a way that wouldn't jeopardize her marriage, for after all, I still love Dave. We've been together for so long. I owe it to him to try to keep it together. That's why I love you so much. You have such deep feelings. I just have to show you that pity is not love, he said, the bloated asshole. As they were walking out, they came into my field of vision. Doris, I noticed, was dressed to kill. I could have sworn that wasn't how she'd left the house that morning. He was tall, maybe 5'3" or 4", slender and athletic. He had black skin, not really swarthy, more like dark coffee-colored, but black. Was he handsome? I guess it's a matter of preference, but he was young, no more than 30. When they parted, they kissed. He hugged her tight and deep until she was finally able to pull away. I wasn't as jealous as I might have imagined. Sure, I wanted to kill him, beat him to a pulp. But to do that, I'd need some leverage. Say a baseball bat and a little surprise. Not fair, but then there's nothing fair about seducing another man's wife. I wasn't tricked. He just wanted to get in her pants, nothing more. All that love nonsense was for nothing. He was a slick operator. He used her until he got bored of her and moved on. Somehow I suspected it wouldn't come as a surprise to Doris. She's a smart woman. My wife was playing a dangerous game, not with her lover, but with me. Could she have believed I would tolerate it? Doris and I have a typical American marriage. Maybe 5% of American men are lords of their domain. They rule their homes. The other 95% have to make do with what they have. In my case, I had to settle for a lot. I never won an argument with Doris. Even when I thought I had won a round and she seemed contrite and apologetic, she actually got her way in the end. She knew that from the beginning, of course, but I had to internalize it. But Mark was different. I was aware of his attraction. He was new and different and forbidden. He was irresistible to a woman like Doris. He offered an alternative to an empty nest and a tired old husband. Mark was only the first man outside our marriage, but not the last. There were few alternatives on my side. Stay with Doris or leave her. The latter was difficult. We'd been through it all together. I was, and I hated to admit it, very dependent on Doris. After so many years together, I couldn't imagine life without her. But then, what if? I asked myself. Coming home that evening, I tried my best to be, if not cheerful, at least neutral. Doris knew my moods and saw me pretending to be calm. "What's wrong, Dave?" she asked. "Nothing, I guess I'm just tired from work," I replied. "You work too much, you should slow down and take better care of yourself. Maybe join a gym," she said. Then I looked at her closely and very critically. You see, I joined a gym last year. I know I left every morning long before she woke up, but could she not see the results? I'd lost 30 of the 40 pounds I'd gained since we'd been married, and I had plenty of muscle since I'd been working out with a personal trainer 3 days a week. Her new boyfriend wasn't about me being out of shape or boring. It was all about her perception of me. I'm a comfortable old pair of slippers. She wants to try on new ones, but she mostly wears the old ones, even though she no longer appreciates them. I paid no attention to her indecision because Doris needed to work on herself. Eventually, she bought the dress she had been looking at and talking about. She was a woman who needed time to make a decision. She was still debating with herself whether to try on a new man. The next day, another surprise awaited me. A phone bug picked up a conversation that I had almost missed listening to. In fact, I only listened because I was curious to see if my wife would even hint to her mother about some things. "Hey, Mom, I wanted to check in with you about Thanksgiving. You're bringing the sweet potatoes baked in bourbon and the broccoli salad." "Of course, dear, but tell me, how was dinner with Mark?" "Oh, Mom, he's just great, but he wants to go further and I can't." Why not? I have no idea why you didn't harass your husband years ago. Now you've lost your edge. The kids are grown. You can't use them as leverage. Mom, I would never do that. I may be a bad wife, but I can't be a bad mother. Nonsense. You're a great wife. Has David ever complained? My answer is no. You keep a perfect home, cook perfectly, raise two wonderful girls, and provide your man with satisfaction in the bedroom. I won't even mention the fact that you contribute more financially to the family than your husband. Yes, but now I'm considering infidelity. No, you're not. It's only cheating if the man doesn't consent to it. David needs to be made aware that women are different from men in material things. As we age, our libido increases and theirs decreases. We need variety in the bedroom while they only need sex. We can please multiple men while our men are limited by their stamina. The fact that you have another man has no effect on Dave. He is a wonderful man and he can prove it by giving you some space. Make sure he knows he'll come first and be treated very well. I don't. David is still a little boy in some ways. Do you really think he'll share with you? And if he doesn't, what can he do? I don't want to risk losing him. Look, your father wouldn't be called broad-minded, but I've been seeing other men for almost 3 decades. He hasn't dumped me and he's not complaining. It took him a while to adjust, but when he did, we were doing more than fine. You should know that. Yeah, but David isn't daddy. I don't see him believing that I have a secret lover. Well, let me talk to Agnes after all. She was involved with his father and knows her son, if anyone does. Remember, she's the one who talked him into marrying you. Let's see what she thinks, my mother-in-law said, and ended the conversation with a few more incoherent words that blew my mind. What did she mean about my mother and father? I had a horrible feeling that I knew, in fact, had always suspected, but wouldn't allow myself to go into it. Tapping Doris's phone had been a mistake. Listening in made me feel inferior. It was finding out what people thought of you, and that wasn't a good thing. I spent the next few days waiting for developments, but there were none, and then my daughter Beth called. Hi, Mom. Pat and I will be home on Tuesday for the vacations, but we need to be home on Saturday. We have hot dates with 2 guys from the soccer team for Sunday after their game. Oh, okay, I'll let your dad know, but I thought Pat was dating that Rick guy who does swimming. Well, she is dating, but he has to take what she gives him, Beth giggled. I guess times have changed if guys are willing to let their girlfriends date other girls. Oh, Mom, you're so ancient, but tell me how things are going with Mark. They're not going. I'm married to your dad. What am I going to do about Mark? Oh, please, Mom, don't be so yesterday. Daddy is a fat old man. He can't expect you to give up a stud like Mark because of some outdated tradition. You have to go for it. Daddy will understand. He loves you, and he really has no choice. Who needs an old man like him? Said Beth. In the background, Patty could be heard adding, That's about right. Then, obviously, Patty grabbed the phone. Mom, you want us to talk to Dad? We can explain this to him and remind him of all you've done for him. I know he loves you like no one else. He can't expect you to be monopolized. It's not fair to you. I don't know. Your father never gave in to me, and God knows when he was younger he had the opportunity. Perhaps he won't see it our way. Men have egos, and your father can be very sensitive. But Mom, we know Dad loves you, and I don't see him denying you anything if you explain how much you want and need a relationship with Mark. Just make sure he understands that you will always put him first. That's what I told Rick, and he's fine with it, Pat said. Girls, your grandmother said she would talk to Grandma Langdon. I'm sure the 2 of them will work things out. I just hope your father can realize that Mark is no danger to him, and that what Mark and I have is just a shadow of what your dad and I have. To say that I was shocked and hurt to hear what my daughters were saying about me would not convey the depth of the pain I felt. Perhaps I should have taken comfort in the fact that my wife and daughters still claimed that Doris still loved the fat old man, but I did not. I was shaken, and it was several days before I could recover enough to appreciate my situation. I let myself forget about how I should look to others. Yes, I played sports and was in good physical shape, but I did nothing about the gray in my hair or the unfashionable clothes I wore. A lawyer should look conservative, but I allowed myself to look ancient. My first step was to go to one of the newly opened salons. I had some of my gray hair removed and styled. They say men don't notice anything, but Doris didn't even comment on it. My next step was a trip to New York to shop for clothes. I pretty much replaced my closet and tried to show off my new slim body. No, I didn't look 30 again, but I didn't look any older than my 45 years. Neither Doris nor my daughters noticed. When the girls came home for Thanksgiving, I expected comments. In response, I received the same kisses on the cheek that I realized I had been receiving for years. My family took me for granted, expecting me to just be there when needed and to stay out of the way when not needed. They had other concerns unrelated to me. Frankly, I had few common interests with my wife and daughters. We were strangers living in the same house. I now knew more about them than they could know about me. I had always been withdrawn and never opened up. Consequently, they had a misconception of me. Thanksgiving came, and with it came the families. The Boswells and the Landons arrived. The guests were various grandparents, grandchildren, siblings, and their spouses. 21 people in all gathered around our dining room table set with all the leaves. They had come early to watch the parade from New York on TV, followed by the soccer game afterward. The women mostly gathered in the kitchen and the men in the living room. I took a bow. I looked into the family room where my daughter-in-law Marianne and Larry Jr.'s wife Anne and my daughter Beth were watching the small children. I headed for the room and locked myself in there. I put in my headphones and got comfortable so I could listen to the conversation in the kitchen through my wife's phone. "He's gone into his room and closed the door," I recognized my daughter Patty's voice. "Okay, someone tell me what's wrong with my son," I heard my mother's voice. "What do you mean, Mom?" my wife replied. "Well, he has new clothes, a new haircut, and, if I'm not mistaken, a little less gray hair." "To tell you the truth, I noticed something, but I couldn't say what it was," Doris said. "If I'm not mistaken, he's also thinner than he was last year," my sister Paula said. She and her husband and daughter lived in California and hadn't seen me since last Christmas. "Yeah, it could be," Mom said. "I don't. He's been really depressed the last 2 weeks. I thought maybe he was having trouble at work again," Doris said. "You don't think he knows about Mark?" "Do you?" my mother-in-law suggested. "I can't see how, and there's nothing for him to know." "I haven't done anything with Mark," my loving wife said. "Perhaps he is having a midlife crisis. He is at that age and the girls have left home." "Maybe that's the point," my mother said. "Yes, that would explain the hair, the weight loss, and the clothes," Boswell's mother suggested. "Then we need to proceed with caution. He needs to be groomed slowly if he's having a midlife crisis," my mother said. "Maybe I should put Mark on hold for later," Doris suggested. "Nonsense. Davy needs a good but gentle kick in the ass. We need to get him out of this state and get him used to the program at the same time. It won't help if you're depressed too," my mom suggested. "So you think Mom should let him know she wants to take a grandmother lover?" Patty asked. "Well, not out of the blue, dear. I think we should talk more to men to soften him up, have him talk to Dad and Larry. They can relax and share their experiences. They are both happy and have adjusted well to the situation. There is no reason why your dad can't be the same. But if he suddenly feels like he's getting older and life is passing him by, it's not the time to tell him right away that his wife has a young lover. We'll get him used to the idea first," Mom said. "Being a cuckold?" giggled Patty. "Of course not. Your father is a proud man, a good husband and father. He needs to be carefully guided and his needs carefully provided for. I never let my husband go without food. He may have come second, but in my heart he was always first. Dave Sr. knows that he is the love of my life. It is up to us, and I mean all of us, to make my son feel loved. Doris, you're first in line, but we've got your back." "Right?" Mom responded in general agreement. And so it went on, with the women dissecting me and planning how to get me cleaned up. How and when Larry and my father should bring me up to speed on what married life was like with a hot wife. They didn't use that term. In their minds, they were satisfying Doris's natural urges and legitimate needs. That way, the marriage would be strong and both parties would be satisfied. After all, Doris had married young and made many sacrifices. Now that there were no children, she could explore the world around her while providing for her husband. My mother was the driving force and obviously had the most experience. They talked about me like I was a child they were trying to get me to behave. I listened until I couldn't take it anymore, and then I picked myself up and walked out of the house. I walked until I decided it was time for the Thanksgiving feast. When I got back to the house, Doris was concerned. No one had noticed me leaving, and my return made them wonder. Late in the afternoon, when we were alone in the house, not counting the girls, Doris inquired what was bothering me. I can't say, except that I know things have to change, and maybe I don't feel like heading off into the unknown. Baby, know that no matter what, I will always love you, and you are and will always be the most important person in the world to me, she said, snuggling up to me in bed. I didn't say anything back because what could I say to that? Her words made me feel guilty. She always made me feel guilty. The first Saturday in December, I found myself at Giant Stadium with my father and father-in-law. Larry had bought tickets and very good seats. My old man paid for a round-trip limo and liquor for the trip. Larry bought beer and snacks at the stadium. Both men were very well prepared. After an awkward start where they tried to get on the topic of how great it was to be a cuckold, they touched on all of my mother's main points. The main arguments were that women of a certain age need a young lover. If you love your wife, you give her the opportunity to explore herself and benefit greatly from it. I let them go without saying anything until that enviable stretch of time that is the last 2 minutes of every professional soccer game. Once again, I remember how much I enjoyed playing soccer as a youngster and how and why I hate watching it. I don't know everything, of course, but I do know for sure that if I ever catch Doris with another man, the marriage will be over. No ifs or buts. I said it so that it would be my last words on the subject. My elders spent the last 2 minutes of the game, which lasted about 20 minutes, trying unsuccessfully to dissuade me from my position. I simply kept repeating that any infidelity to Doris would result in my leaving. Who needs a whore as a wife? After all, that's exactly the kind of woman she is, I said, and the 2 older men called me immature and bigoted before heading for the men's room. They were gone a long time, and the stadium had mostly cleared out before they came back to me, and we headed home in a quiet limo. Later that evening, I discovered that it wasn't just a line for the men's room. They had called home. Both my mother and mother-in-law called Doris before we even got home to discuss the situation. Further steps had to be taken. Not a week later, Larry and Dad dragged me again to the gentlemen's club, where there were dancers and barmaids. Larry and Dad alternately ordered overpriced drinks and lap dances. I was limited to soft drinks, and my lap was free of foreign objects. The wise words of the older hedonists boiled down to the benefits of a mature and open marriage. I can't imagine myself trading my wife's fidelity for a lap dance, I said before leaving. I caught a cab and left alone. Nothing was said to me afterward about leaving those 2 old fools. As we drove up to Christmas, the conversations I heard were more intense. Mark was flirting with my wife and insisting on an appointment during the school vacation. It was the perfect time for lovers. They were free all day, and I was theoretically working. In fact, if anyone looked closely at me, they would have suspected that all was not right. I think it's time for a confession. You see, I am what some would call shady or crooked. For many years, I carefully stepped over the line until, given to temptation, I left it far behind. It started with keyhole lots for the less knowledgeable. A keyhole lot is a subdivision that has only a small portion of a road. It can be difficult to build on such a lot because access to the main parcel of land is limited. This is the situation in this part of the country because of our archaic zoning laws. Rural land can be sold in 5-acre parcels with no subdivision requirements. Many farmers, to raise money, start selling off 5-acre lots along roads. When the main farm goes up for sale, there may only be a small plot left in front of the road. This way you get large tracts with what are called keyhole lots. There were 10 keyhole lots near a New York State highway, all developed with mobile homes or prefabricated 2-bedroom cabins. They were in the middle of nowhere. They were 20 miles from a highway interchange. They were very undesirable and therefore inexpensive properties. A large national retailer had come to the area and needed a warehouse with good access to the interstate. All they needed was 10 turnkey lots and a new entrance to the thruway. No problem, and my buddy Jimmy got that information long before it leaked out. When I was knocking on doors to promote my services, I saw this. A small for sale sign on a dilapidated fence post. It turned out to be 250-plus acres of substandard pasture. The remains of an old dairy farm, well outside the redevelopment area, but located on an old county road. That road will soon have to be replaced by a good state road that leads directly to the thruway highway. This was land that was worth at best $1,500 an acre and would soon be 20 times that price. You had to be a saint to resist, and I was no saint. Buying the land emptied my 401 bank and all the savings I had. I was left with no land. My business became a funnel to pay taxes and develop the land. I invested it in a Wyoming corporation called Stuyvesant Limited, which a dubious type sold to me for $7,000. He had set it up 5 years earlier for people like me who needed to hide what they were doing. Wyoming didn't require disclosure of officers, directors, and shareholders. Nothing connected me to Stuyvesant. It was left to me to explain to Doris that my business was in trouble and I was barely contributing to the household expenses. I couldn't tell her why my finances were strained, so I lied. I blamed the economy and stiff competition. Any other wife would have been angry or at least let me know what a loser I was. Doris kissed me and said, "It'll be all right, Davy. As long as we're all healthy and together, who cares?" Doris worked extra classes and cut back on everything except what the girls needed. She made do without everything. I don't think she bought herself a single new thing in the year and a half I struggled. I promised I would fix things when the time came, but somehow that never happened. 2 years after I bought it, I sold the last acre. The average price I got was $22,000 an acre. After that, I started buying in front of the state, just where they were buying. Questions arose. The insiders, accustomed to doing what I was doing, regarded it with suspicion. An investigation was required, but the big shots didn't want to kill the goose that laid the golden eggs. I stayed small and stayed out of their way. I didn't touch the money. I told myself it was for our old age, mine and Doris's. By then, people would have forgotten, and I could come up with some plausible explanation for my family about how I'd earned my dirty money honestly. The last thing I wanted was for Doris and our families to find out what kind of man I really was. At all costs, I had to protect my secret. I never imagined I would listen to my family's dirty secrets. We spent Christmas Eve at a relative's house, as has become customary, but Christmas Day was spent in a big way at my family's house. We arrived early as my mom and Doris had made arrangements between them. As usual, Doris cooked a huge roast turkey with stuffing. Mama Boswell was making a crown roast of lamb, and my mom had a ham in the oven. It was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon when I lifted the stuffed turkey in a heavy iron skillet from the trunk of Doris's new Mercedes. The car, for which a sizable down payment had been a birthday present from her parents. "David, when you're done bringing the turkey into the house, I'd like to talk to you in the den," my mother announced. It wasn't a request, but there was no hostility in her tone. On the contrary, it sounded sympathetic. The den was a small room at the front of the house, somewhat isolated. Mom was sitting on a short couch or chair when I entered. There were several chairs in the room, but she indicated that I should sit next to her. I sat down next to her as she turned toward me, our knees almost touching. She took both of my hands in hers, and I felt the coolness of those hands, so familiar to me in my youth. "David, what's going on? You don't seem to be yourself. If you're in trouble, I and the rest of this family are here to help you." She said this, leaning in, looking me straight in the eye, waiting for a response. Perhaps a request for help or guidance. A mother talking to her troubled son, hoping to comfort him. What could possibly be wrong? I have a loving and supportive family, a believing wife and 2 devoted daughters. I let the words I spoke sink into my consciousness. My mom isn't stupid. She heard what wasn't being said. David, an honest man, supports his wife in what she needs. Being a good husband is part of making sacrifices, as your good wife has sacrificed so often for you over the last 20 years. My mother was a very smart woman. She immediately realized that I was not the ignorant fool I was taken for, and came up with a response. It was a clever appeal to the kindness and fairness she had instilled in me as a child, the values we adopt from our parents and cultivate through our personal behavior. From her perspective, I understood that it was about a man's commitment to his marriage and family. It was a strange case of her completely misjudging her son, and that mistake was entirely my fault. I had misled everyone for so long that they didn't know me anymore. I wasn't the good, reliable person they thought I was. I wore the costume of a hapless husband and father, a man to be taken advantage of because of his own kind and loving nature. Her approach would never have worked on the man I was, but she couldn't have known that the sleeper had awakened in a new world where technology reveals all secrets and human corruption prevails. The thing is, I don't think having a whore as a wife is honorable. Of course, all things are for sale. We sell ourselves for what we want, and it's not always money. In fact, it's rarely money, even if it changes hands. Nevertheless, not all transactions are dishonest. Some we make before God. We make a promise and ask for a blessing. True, we don't always keep our word, but we must try. Otherwise, the woman may end up kissing her son goodnight, with lips still warm from her infidelity. At the last sentence, Mom jumped back as if I'd slapped her. Until that moment, she'd been ready to continue the argument. I could see the emotions playing in her eyes: surprise, shame, anger, and finally pain. David, what did you say? I said that your kisses when you came home from your adulteries were an abomination. She released my hands and ran out of the room. I didn't need the phone to hear Doris's words of anguish as my mom ran out of the room. Mommy, what happened? Cried Doris. She must have been waiting for my mom's nod to ambush me. Apparently, this was a planned intervention. Perhaps all the family members were planning on hitting me during the day. When I left the room, there was no one around. Mom had apparently run off to the kitchen, bringing another available family member with her. I decided I could use a strategic retreat and walked out the front door as quietly as possible. I still had the keys to Doris's Mercedes and drove to the state park to the Hendrick Hudson Observation Deck, a lover's alley from my youth. It took me until the end of my senior year of high school to pick up a girl here, and that I didn't get any further than first base. I was not and am not a Casanova. But when I turned 25 and had just graduated from law school, women began to look at me very differently. Unfortunately, by then I was hooked. Doris had gotten a hold of me and wasn't going to let go. Looking at my situation, it was two sides of the same coin. When Doris needed me, I was expected to obey. Now that she was looking for someone else, I was asked and expected to submit again, allowing her the freedom I was denied. Strangely, I saw the logic in that. Doris had sacrificed far more for the marriage than I had. She'd made it work. She raised the next generation. If I had stayed single, we probably would never have had children. We wouldn't have bought a house, planned for retirement, or done anything at all. Now Doris wanted a little of what she thought was harmless fun. A little of what she was sorely lacking. She didn't deny me the opportunity. She just didn't believe I could take advantage of the offer. You see, I'm old and fat. My mom's good intentions today were to make me see my limitations, but to reassure me that they all still loved me and would make it as easy as possible for me. They were kind, they thought, and I was selfish. In a way, I knew from the beginning that it would come to this. I'm not blind or stupid, but Mom and Doris are right about a lot of things. I remained a child. Unfortunately, I haven't stayed a child. I'm spoiled. I've seen the game being played, and I've sunk into the mud to play. I fool myself that I did it for others or that it was necessary. It wasn't. I cheated because I wanted to win, and more for the sake of winning than for the money. To lose to Doris is to lose, and I've been losing to Doris for 20 years. Parking in the lot, I pulled out my iPad and opened the spyware. He's not anywhere in the house and Mom's car is gone, I heard my daughter Beth say. With any luck, he won't be back, I heard Anne, my brother-in-law Larry's wife, intervene. I always knew Anne disliked me, but now she had a reason. Anne is a real hottie. You can't call her handsome, but she radiates attractiveness and has what I call a bedroom voice. I understood why Larry Jr., who isn't the sharpest tool in the shed, married her, but it was a stupid move. This woman was actually broadcasting her infidelities. Larry ignores the not-so-subtle gossip and his wife's rather egregious behavior. My brother-in-law worked as a vice president at his family's bank. It was obvious nepotism, but perfectly acceptable in that industry. His fat salary and social standing ensured that no matter how hard Anne played, she always came home afterward to a comfortable lifestyle. Anne and Larry had a 5-year-old son who had the same blonde hair and blue eyes as his supposed father. They always seemed to get along with each other. Now, as I listened, the mother hatched a plan. My son is more than stubborn. He practically called me a whore to my face, my mother informed me. I don't believe that, my mother-in-law said. Dave is too good a man for that. I find that hard to believe, and I've heard it, but I've heard it. He seems to know it all somehow. The old folks must have been careless with their words, and he took it all out of context, explained dear old Mom. What shall we do? I don't want to lose my husband, said Doris. We must be cunning. If he won't come willingly, we have to use some tricks, said my mom. I don't know. We shouldn't underestimate my brother. He's always been shrewd. Not the smartest, but the most cunning. Remember what he did to Uncle Jack during the poker game. He can be very clever, I heard my sister say. She was referring to the time when, as a teenager, I discovered that my uncle cheated quite often in our bi-weekly poker games. Everyone knew about it, but did nothing about it since we were playing for pennies. Nevertheless, I felt bad about being cheated, so I figured out how he stacked the deck when he shuffled and cheated him back. For several weeks he kept losing, but he couldn't expose me without exposing himself. The game suddenly ended and my uncle stopped talking to me. My sister remembered this because she asked me what Uncle John's problem was, and I laughed, telling her. Yes, but he has a weakness we can exploit, Mom said. Then she laid out her scheme. The weakness she was referring to was my inability to tolerate alcohol. I don't drink, but I'm a happy drunk until I fall asleep. Give me enough alcohol and I'll pass out. Mom's plan was simple. Get me drunk at a family party on New Year's Eve. While they were pouring me drinks, Anne would be hitting on me. When I woke up, I would find myself in someone else's bed and confronted by an irate wife. When presented with evidence of my infidelity, I could hardly object to my wife's suggestion that we open our marriage to others. Of course, opening our marriage meant that Doris would be allowed to play while I stayed at home. The big stumbling block was Anne's reluctance to pursue this with what she called the old fat man. The general consensus was that I didn't possess enough attraction. Anne was the best choice. Since Larry was a good friend of mine, the guilt factor would be magnified. And after all, she didn't have to do anything, just get some suggestive pictures. To assist in this endeavor, they chose my brother Samuel's wife, Elaine. She was a little shy girl who was afraid of her own shadow. She was drawn into the plan because of her desire to fit in. She was also the perfect witness, being the newest member of the family, married to my brother for only 2 years and currently pregnant. From the front seat of my wife's expensive car, I looked out over the northern Catskills, where Washington Irving had staged Rip Van Winkle. It's a strange view in the winter fog moving across the dark mountains. The Hudson River silvers in the east. A nice setting for an Irving folktale, but no place to listen to your marriage die. But then Doris spoke up. We have to give Dave another chance. More time, she said. What about Mark? Will he wait? Her mother asked. Mark is very worried. We both have this week off this week, and it's the perfect time, as he put it, to get a room. However, I need my David. He is my first and true love. I'm going to deal with him. He has never denied me anything, and I don't see him denying me anything completely. He and I have to come to an understanding, she said. Look, my plan will work. He's harsh, but your husband has earned it with his attitude. I suggest you talk some more, but be careful not to keep your lover waiting because of my stupid son, my mother said. I'll give Dave one more chance to step forward, Doris said, ending the conversation. I had no choice but to go back and sit through Christmas dinner with my family. Everyone received me very coolly except Anne, who apparently resigned herself to having to flirt with an old fat man. Doris grabbed me and pulled me out the door to her Mercedes. What about the Christmas diner? I asked. We're not going there. We need to talk, she said. There's something to talk about, I asked. Yes, but not in the car, she said with a slightly sly smile. She drove to the Hilton. She'd called ahead and booked a room, and when he got there, the White Star champagne was already waiting for him. What's there to talk about? What's wrong, love? She said. What could possibly be wrong? Oh, please stop. It's not us. I love you. I will always love you. I want to be with you always until death do us part, just like we promised. Give up on everyone else? You know I could never love another. Use yes. Love no, she said. Is there any difference? Said I. Of course there is. I'm trying to assure you that we will be together and inseparable forever, she said. You can keep the bird in the cage, but don't leave the door open. What does that mean? I offer each of us freedom because we love each other. That's what binds us together. I won't fly away, she said. Please don't believe me. I do, but you're wrong. No, believe me, I can only love you, she said. I didn't have an answer. She missed it by failing to understand the other side. Please don't let male pride hurt us. We're only talking about bodily functions. It doesn't mean anything. Dee, please believe me, this is an argument you can't afford to win. Be happy with what you have and I'll stand by my opinion. Just don't open the door. Don't be stubborn. You know I'll always take care of you, just like I did before. You need me, don't be stupid, she said. I hugged her, realizing that there might not be a future for us. She couldn't realize that it was all a lie. Yes, the lie was a lapse on my part, an inability to tell the unattractive truth. I had avoided the central issue of our marriage for 19 plus years until Doris believed the original lie she had told herself and which I had never challenged. "Oh, I love you. Everything will be fine. Believe me," she would say, not realizing that she wasn't the problem. "No, believe me, I will never accept what you are offering." "I kept my end of the bargain," I said, and ended the conversation. On Wednesday of the following week, Mark invited my wife over to his house for lunch. I listened long enough to make sure they were done with my marriage. Apparently, by mutual agreement, the loving couple did not mention the horny husband. It was as if I didn't exist. Friday was New Year's Eve. I started with a drink at my favorite establishment, Irish Mist. It's a restaurant bar. I invited all of my older friends over for drinks, but no family members. I limited myself to non-alcoholic drinks. I didn't get to Larry Jr.'s house until 8 p.m., and that was by cab. My old Honda was parked some distance from Larry's house that day and hopefully went unnoticed. When I arrived, I smelled like the bar I had spent most of that day in, and I was acting a little worse for wear than usual. It wasn't long before they brought me a very strong drink. They started slowly but quickly increased the level of intoxication. I had a heck of a time getting rid of them, but fortunately Anne and Larry believe in houseplants. They and a few trips to the restroom allowed me to stay sober while I acted like a drunk. Anne asked me to dance. I let her do her best, and after a while I responded as best I could. Apparently this happened about a half hour after the balloon dropped in Times Square, and by then I was pretending to be completely intoxicated. It must have been convincing because Anne and Elaine took my hands and started helping me up the stairs. Upon reaching the room I assumed to be the guest bedroom, they threw me on the bed. "I don't think I want you to do that," I said. Elaine jumped back with a look of surprise on her face. "Shit, shit, shit!" Anne swore. "My sister warned you, but who listens in this family?" I said. "Now both of you go downstairs and send that traitorous fool who calls herself my wife down here." With these words, they ran out of the room. A long time seemed to pass as I sat listening to the commotion below. A few raised voices were heard, but I didn't even try to eavesdrop, as eavesdropping in this little drama was already over. Eventually, Doris appeared in the bedroom doorway. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. "Yes, come in and sit down," I said in as soft and friendly a voice as was possible under the circumstances. Doris sat down, and the tears flowed by themselves. When her nose streamed, the tears ended. She was sorry that she had made a terrible mistake in listening to the others. "What are you sorry about? That Doris wanted another man, or that you had fun with him last Wednesday at his apartment?" She shrieked, and I saw fear for the first time. "No, maybe it's just that Mom's scheme didn't work and now you're caught up in it." "Please, David, I love you. It doesn't mean anything. You have to believe it." "I know you love me and will forgive me," she said, perhaps a little taken aback at how calm I was. "No, Doris, I won't forgive you." "Oh, please, David, forgive me and let us forget about it." "Oh, I forgive you, Doris. There's really nothing to forgive except a little deception. The problem is the rest of it. You see, I don't love you, never have, and probably never will." "You don't mean that, David. That's your anger talking." I couldn't help but laugh. "Do I seem angry?" "Let me assure you that you are not. I've spent the last 19 plus years in this marriage. It wasn't all bad. It's been a sort of gilded cage, but now the door is open, and I walk in thanking you for finally setting me free." "David, please, that's not what you meant. I'm not going to let you divorce me over such a small thing after all the years of loving devotion I've given you. Do what you want, I'm leaving. I had it all worked out. You held me to pure guilt, and now I have none. You wanted an open marriage, and I'm giving you the most open marriage there can be, namely a marriage without a husband." With those words, I stood up and started to walk away. "What will you tell our daughters?" she asked, starting to get angry. "Goodbye is all I will say. I wish to God I could believe they weren't mine, but considering what they are and what my mother is like, I don't doubt it. So goodbye is all I have for them and nothing more." Then I stopped and thought to myself, that's not true. My girls are the little ones that will always be with me. They are locked in my heart. They never grew up. They still wonder if the ducklings will cross the road, I said. With those words, I left my crying wife and walked down the stairs. Of course, my mother, supported by my father, tried to stop me leaving. Where are you going? Mom demanded. A good question that I don't have an answer to, but I guess to a lot of places I haven't been able to visit in 20 years, I said. So you're just going to run away because life didn't work out the way you wanted it to, she said. No, I'm leaving to find my life, the one I've missed so much. Oh, please, David, be reasonable. Everything you have is here. Everyone who loves you is here. Everything we've ever done has been for you. Don't let stupid male pride ruin your life. You don't have a life without us. How will you live? Who will take care of you? If you leave, there may be no going back, son. Think about what that means. Doris has been good to you. We all know how addicted you are, Dad said. I'm sorry, but I was already gone. You just didn't notice. The key was in the lock. You just had to turn it, I said. With those words, I kissed my mom gently on the cheek and left, waving broadly at the others and saying a firm goodbye. I left my wife, daughters, brothers, sisters, and parents behind. I was free. I was alone, but really inside I had always been alone, and I wasn't going to be alone for long. An older but not fat man possessed the greatest aphrodisiac in existence, cash millions for physical attractiveness. I was cashing in and traveling to the most remote and decadent places I could find. I traded one old whore for as many young ones as I could handle. I got out of prison after 20 years of incarceration, and a new and different world awaited me. This is where I end the story. I know I will get all sorts of comments telling me it is not finished. But you have to use your imagination. Whatever you do with your freedom and lots of money, whatever it is, it will be better than what I write. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.